So why do we even follow the rules? Your book talks about like four reasons why. The first one being habit. That because, we learn these rules in some cases very early on in life, that they become overlearned behaviors and they no longer even feel oppressive but natural because we've been doing them for so long. And so your book uses the example of, how do we pee, to make that point. The fact that men pee standing up and women pee sitting down is a learned behavior because, well, for one thing, we teach boys initially how to pee sitting down, but shortly after we transition them to teaching them how to pee standing up, for really no reason besides to fit in, because we know that that's what will be expected of them as men. And we never do so for girls. But your book does note there are other societies where women do pee largely standing up. And apparently they've done studies that show that with practice and training, women can pee standing up with really, no worse aim than a lot of men. But we don't do that, and we don't even feel like we're missing out by not doing that because it's just a habit that women pee sitting down and men pee standing up. Next reason why we follow the rules, pleasure. It is pleasurable to follow the rules, and your book talks about that. Why is it pleasurable? First of all, because if you've been taught the rule and then you are able to successfully uphold it, there's a certain amount of pleasure in that success, just personal intrinsic pleasure of doing the rule well. But then also you are likely to receive positive feedback from those around you for successfully upholding the rule. And that's pleasurable to receive that positive feedback. So I like to dress up, and it makes me feel good when I look nice. Like I feel a sense of pleasure and success, like, oh, I really pull myself together well today. But then also when I look nice, it increases the likelihood that I will get compliments, that people will smile at me, that if I, when I'm dressed up nicely and something happens to my car, I have found that people are, and by people I mean usually men, are, much more likely to step in and help me put air in my tires when I'm wearing heels and a dress heading to work than when I'm wearing tennis shoes and workout clothes heading to the gym. And so all of this can build it, this certain kind of pleasurable feeling of, oh, I'm doing this well. I'm upholding this rule well. Now, of course, there's a dark side to these success stories. Like certainly if we're successfully upholding this gender rule, we're also kind of contributing to the idea that this is a natural distinction or difference. Like this is part of how those deceptive differences come about. And, so let me go back to my car example. My dad has tried to teach me many times how to do a lot of basic car things myself. And I largely, I don't learn because I just don't want to. Like I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy getting my hands dirty. It's just not very interesting to me. Now, clearly I could learn it because I'm a smart person. Most of us are smart people. We learn how to do things all the time. So when I am actively choosing to not learn it, and then I find myself in the situation where I need this help. And oftentimes, I still get the help that I need, that there's someone out there willing to change my tire or put air in my tires or, and whatever. But the dark side to this is as that random guy is changing my tire or putting air in my tires, I am feeding into that stereotype of, well, women just don't know anything about cars, or like, or women are horrible drivers, or they don't practice good car maintenance, right? In that moment, I am upholding that stereotype, and that is the dark side of these, success stories. Another reason why we follow the rules might just be observation, because we know that we're being observed. And even if we don't think that the person is that anyone's going to do or anything or say anything, even if we don't think there are consequences, we might just, we don't want to risk that gender assessment that was talked about at the start of the chapter. And so this is where your book talks about flatulence, but then also they give the example of public dining, that women eat slower and take smaller bites when dining in public versus in private, largely because of that gender rule, right, about women being dainty eaters. And yeah, if you've ever grubbed so hard in private that you bit your finger, then you know that, when there's no one around to observe you, is that a rule that you really practice? And then finally, policing. So gender policing is when basically your behavior is assessed, but not just assessed, is policed. There is some element of consequences, right? People are trying to punish you or rein in your gender deviance, your norm breaking. And so, this concept of policing does come out of the study of deviance. And deviance is a sociological term that's really just meant when people deviate, when they break norms, not just gender norms, but just any norms. And that one reason why people oftentimes refrain from engaging in deviance is because of sanctions in society, social sanctions. And those sanctions can be positive. They can be a reward when you're upholding the norm, and they can be negative sanctions if you're engaging in deviance. And those sanctions is in essence what policing is. Basically, the random person, average person, has the ability to kind of control and influence your behavior by making it more or less likely that you will engage in deviance. And so your book notes, it can take a lot of forms. It can be verbal. It can be glaring. It can be gossip. It can be, something more severe than that. It can be physical. It can be ostracization. The form it takes is oftentimes depending on context, and it also depends on who is doing the policing, their relationship with you, how well they know you, how much they care about you. All of those things can kind of come into play. But I think the big takeaway is just the idea that we are policed, that we can self-police, right? Like we can rein ourselves in, we can punish ourselves, prevent our own selves from engaging in deviance, because sometimes we police ourselves before a person, outsider does. And then we police others, which isn't something that we like to think about or talk about. Oftentimes, when I teach a class that is about sexuality and intimacy, or when I took a break from teaching and I worked in a women's center, this is something that came up even among my male and female students that considered themselves feminist and open-minded and progressive. I would catch them in their day-to-day conversations, referring to women on campus as sluts or whores, and usually it had something to do with her dating behavior that was considered non-normative. And I would always point out, like, this is policing, right? The idea that a woman's a slut and a guy's a stud, especially if you're referring to something about like the number of persons a person has been with. Or a lot of times it wasn't even that. It was something much less, like, oh, she's always flirting with a lot of guys, or smiling in a lot of guys' faces. Oh, did you see what she wore to campus? And and I use that as an example of how even sometimes people who consider themselves to be very self-aware, to be very open and tolerant when it comes to gender, we can fall into this trap, this very, very easy trap where we police other people. And in your book notes, sometimes we even recruit other people to police us, right? Like we ask for their feedback knowing that we're going to be policed. And so all of this, just kind of points to the fact that we follow the rules a lot. And our choices, as your book notes, are, follow the rules, break the rules and face the consequences, or figure out how to persuade others to let us break the rules. And so we've talked about that first option of following the rules. Let's now talk about what happens when we don't follow the rules, because we don't always follow the rules. So your book goes over a lot of reasons why we sometimes don't follow the rules. Sometimes the rules become impossible to follow, due to age, due to disability. But sometimes there are just some rules. It's like, oh, I can't do this rule anymore. Due to illness. And then sometimes the rules themselves are just contradictory. And if they're contradictory rules, then if you follow one, then you are going to not follow the other, because that's how contradiction works. Sometimes we don't have the resources to follow a rule. And they talk about, how there's still this expectation that men pay for dates. Or if you think about for married partners, that in a lot of circles, maybe even still the expectation that men are the primary breadwinners, that even if both partners work, that men should make more money. And what happens if you just don't have the resources to uphold that rule? And then sometimes we break rules because following it is just personally undesirable or socially wrong. So, if you're like just a really laid back pacifist, guy, and there's this rule about, okay, you don't walk away from a fight if someone puts hands on you. That's just not manly. You got to stay and, hold your ground and fight. If that just really doesn't align with your personal beliefs and ideology about violence, then that would just be a rule that you just can't uphold. And then finally, sometimes it's desirable. We break rules because sometimes it's just fun. It's fun to rebel. Now, what happens when we break the rules? There are kind of two ways you can break the rules. One's kind of a sly way where you basically are trying to get people's permission for you to break the rules and not face consequences. And the other one is a lot more overt, like I'm breaking the rules and I don't care. So the sly way, this is where you offer an account. And accounts work because they present gender nonconformity as either incidental, as opposed to intentional, or sporadic, occasional, as opposed to kind of constant or permanent. And so basically an account is your explanation why you're breaking the gender rule. You're offering an explanation as to why you're breaking this gender rule. And you offer that explanation to demonstrate accountability. And that's because it's the idea that even though you're not upholding the rule, by offering an explanation as to why you're not upholding the rule, you're still kind of upholding the rule. You're verbally affirming the rule. And the fact that people do this, whether they agree with the rule or not, just shows you the power that gender rules have. And so, one of the examples the book gives is, you really have to go to the bathroom. The line is really long for women's. There's no one in the men's. So, you're a woman, you run into the bathroom, you use the men's bathroom, you come out, you see some people look at you and you say like, oh, the line was really long with the women and I just could not hold it. That is an account, right? You're trying to make people, you're affirming the fact that you're okay with the fact that there are these sex segregated bathrooms and you don't always use the male bathroom, and you're explaining why you used it this one time. Now, not your accounts don't always work though. Sometimes your accounts can fail. And the example of the guy who was trying to explain, why he watched rom-com movies, and he tried to offer the explanation that his girlfriend really likes to watch them. And that wound up being a failed account because his friends still teased him, because of the rule that men are supposed to wear the figurative plants in the relationship. So the fact that he was saying that he was letting his girlfriend make these decisions, that was the account that he decided to give. It wound up being a failed account. It did not give him that. It did not offer him that accountability. The other way you can break the rules is you can just break them. You can just confront them head on. Don't offer an account. Say, I'm breaking this rule because this is BS, because this is stupid, because this is what I want to do. This is more contentious because keep in mind, most people are upholding a lot of the rules or upholding the rule most of the time. And so for you to just confront it and break it without offering an account, without affirming the rule, this is going to make people perhaps feel attacked, make them feel defensive. And so this is the more contentious, controversial, potentially even more dangerous way of breaking the rules. Your book notes that some people are better at this than others, to kind of go back to our concept of intersectionality. But to add to the concept of power to it, for intersectionality, you have all these identities, and for each identity, there is a more powerful, more dominant position and a less powerful, less dominant position. And most of us are a mix of identities. So we are a mix of having powerful positions in society and having non-powerful positions in society. So obviously, if you are a person that has a lot of identities associated with being dominant positions, like you're white and you are a US citizen and you are not differently able, disabled, you're rich, you're highly educated, if you hold these other positions, you're heterosexual, right? Then you breaking a rule is probably going to go very differently than someone who has positions, other identities that are largely non-dominant, right? They're disabled, they're, LGBTQT, they are a person of color, right? The kind of lack of dominant positions that they hold probably means that they are going to be at much greater risk of facing negative consequences, regardless of the account that they offer. And then just note that really important quotation about why breaking a rule does not make you free from it, on page 87 and 88. And that's just because unless a lot of people are breaking a rule and push this cultural change, one person breaking a rule here or there, especially if they're offering an account, this isn't really destroying the gender binary system. This isn't this isn't destruction of the system, and the authors make sure to note that. And so we end with this quote. Because we can't or don't want to follow gender rules, we break them quite frequently, so long as we offer a good excuse. All of this makes the rules seem legitimate and true. We manage to simultaneously break and affirm the rules, making it seem like everyone buys into them. And so that really is just the number one gender rule, the one that transcends all identities and is true across cultures and subcultures, especially throughout recent history. And the number one gender rule is that you do gender, right? That, you can break a few rules here and there, but for most of us, it is that you do gender, you uphold the gender rules. And if you don't follow this rule, you become culturally unintelligible, because keep in mind, being animals that have such low sexual dimorphism, if there is sexual ambiguity and you don't help clear up that sexual ambiguity by clearly doing gender, you now become culturally unintelligible. And in a society that still says gender is important, and bases a lot of how we interact with people on, we base a lot of that around their gender, and our stereotypes and our expectations in regards to that. This can lead to people not knowing how to treat you, how to act towards you. And so as an example of the type of script that would never be on SNL today, but was quite popular maybe about 20 years ago. I give you a clip, and that character from SNL is called Pat, and that was the whole point of Pat, is people did not know what Pat's gender was. Pat knew Pat's gender, but Pat did not act in such a way in terms of upholding or rejecting gender roles that made it clear whether Pat was a woman or Pat was a man. And so if you watch the clip, this is a skit that takes place at the gym. But it's worth noting that there were several. This was a reoccurring skit, and it really just speaks to, once again, this idea that if we can't assess you and classify you, you become culturally unintelligible, and there are social consequences to that. And so that's it for chapter 4.